Well, hey guys, welcome to Man Talk. My name is Vince Miller. I'm your host. Good to be with you again. Of course, you know, Man Talk is just simply men talking.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. So anyway, today I'm sitting here with Dave Dutrieuille. Thanks for being with us, man.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Tell us where we're at right now.
Man, where are we at?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, right now we're at Trout Lake Camp.
Yeah.
And it's been a fantastic weekend. Just a bunch of men getting together, being real with each other, but also being vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I think that's just something, Vince, that you've been doing a great job talking about and helping lead us into, as a bunch of strangers and yet as a part of a community, you know, as followers of Christ. So
yeah, it's been a blast, man. I've had a great time with Dave here and so many other guys, and so it's good to get away sometimes, guys. I would encourage you to think about doing that. Sometimes we need to remove ourselves from the daily context to kind of reflect on life, build new relationships, and sometimes it's a great catalyst for a new year. So here we are sitting at this time of year, and you know, it's starting to get a little cooler, and you know, hey man, it's time to reset, you know. So we're still in this book called 30 Virtues That Build a Man, and I got to be honest with you, I love this book. Of course, I was a big part of writing it, but I just love the conversations that I'm having with other guys like you. And today's lesson is on conflict, man. And you know what? I never have conflict, ever. Yeah.
No, never. Especially with my wife.
Yeah, never. Yeah, we never have these problems, right? How many years have you been married, David?
So it'll be 6 years this December.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Great. Good for you.
Thank you.
6 years you made it.
I made
You've
it.
had some conflict, huh?
Oh man, if there was time, I'd tell you a story about why I remember my anniversary day.
Oh.
And the wonderful grace that my wife showed me because of great potential for conflict.
You did not forget your anniversary.
Oh, did I forget it?
That's a mistake, right? Yeah. However, I will tell you, one year my wife did forget my birthday.
Whoa.
Oh, and that has been used for fodder
Yes,
for
it
years,
has.
bro. So it goes both ways, right? It creates conflict both ways. My wife didn't know when my birthday was. Oh, man. That's horrible. Anyway, so we're talking about conflict, and we do encounter it, clearly.
Yes.
We encounter it in our marriage.
Yes, we do.
We encounter it in our workplace. We encounter it with friends. We even have interpersonal conflict when we're watching the news.
That's right.
Right? Or we're listening to the radio. We have conflicts all the time, right? So we probably will have a conflict today.
I believe it.
Right?
Yeah.
And so what do you think it is? I mean, we can't avoid this thing. Clearly we're going to have it. Why are we so adverse to conflict? What's your thoughts on that?
That's a great question, Vince. Adverse to being or to encountering conflict. I think one of the reasons why conflict is so difficult is because we're not honest with the fact that we want the world to revolve around ourselves.
That's well said.
Right? And so what happens is when that gets disrupted because we're not being honest.
Yeah.
When that gets disrupted, all of a sudden, we realize how much we want things to be about me, myself, and I.
Yeah.
And so the story then continues to unfold. I'm going to respond or react to you in a way that's going to redirect the limelight, redirect the conversation to feed the beast.
Yeah,
right?
Of self.
That's right.
Yeah. That's very well put, David, and I like it because it really is us bumping up against the sovereignty of God. You
Absolutely.
know, and it begins with really something deep in our own heart, right? That we probably are unaware of this thing.
Yeah.
You know, we probably aren't aware that the conflict is emanating from our own selfishness, our own pride, or the fact, like you said, I love that image of the world revolving around me. We want to cycle it back to our concerns and our cares and me, and again me, and again me, right? And we really bump against this thing. And, you know, self is really a big monster, right? It's an enemy within, and we deal with this all the time. So, yes, it is partly to do with us wanting to control things, us wanting things our way. What does it look like when it manifests in your life? Like when conflict manifests in your life, what does it look like?
Sure. So, I mean, most recently, you know, as I'm working through some major life decisions with my wife, I'm a big picture dreamer. I'm a risk taker.
Oh, really?
And so, come on. So one of the things for me, as I've grown up, just watching my father, he was at best a semi-calculated risk taker.
Okay.
Give me some big picture bullet points, okay? Give me a few moments with somebody, and off we go.
Yeah.
My wife, though, she's a calculated risk taker. So it's not that she's unwilling to take a risk, but for instance, we'd been looking at some places in the inner city, and just to simply put it, in the hood.
Yeah.
And I'm getting all excited, like, oh, look at this place. Oh, look at that place. Oh, and I'm a people person.
Yeah.
So the minute I start talking to a neighbor or two, all of a sudden my heartstrings are starting to pull. And my wife so wonderfully is like, David, are you drawn to this place because you've just talked to a couple of people? Or are you drawn to this place because the Lord is leading our family here?
Yeah.
And so, like the gracious husband I am, I say, what are you talking about, honey? I mean, we need to be with the unreached, the unengaged.
Yeah.
And so I start defensively responding to her.
Right, exactly.
And after the moment,
Right.
I just asked the Lord, what in the world was that?
Right.
And so what I see when conflict starts arising, it's usually I get a feeling of shame or I'm not being valued for how God has wired me naturally or normally.
Right.
And for whatever the reason, there becomes this dissonance, like I'm not valued, I'm not worthy, or I'm not appreciated.
Right.
So when I start getting that sense, all of a sudden, I get defensive, or if it gets overwhelming, I might actually withdraw. And that's a great indicator for my wife, specifically, when I start withdrawing from, you can be home, but not be home.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Right.
When that starts happening, Angela begins to just ask a couple of questions. And she only needs to ask two because then I start mulling it over. So
that's really good. Okay, so I love how you're describing it, and it's very transparent. I think it's super helpful for guys because this is what happens kind of in slow motion in our heart, right? Like we have these conflicts, and we have an agenda, and then we have a way that we process it, and then we have a way that we respond to it.
That's right.
And typically, in the moment, this is happening so quickly.
Yes.
It's hard to judge that. We often judge it as we reflect on it, laying on our bed late at night going, why is this woman not engaging with me right now? And what just happened?
Right.
Like, I think a lot of men go like, what just happened to me?
Absolutely.
I don't even understand what happened. And we're confused by it because it happens so quickly.
Yes.
And it's our hearts going awry a little bit. And then when we have the conflict, it's either we press into it harder or we run away from it, right?
it.
And so in the moment we tend to, at least I do, and it sounds like you're the same, we push into it.
Absolutely.
And then after it's done, when we feel bad, we run away from it, that
right.
fight or flight. And some people are exactly the opposite. They run from it, and then they try to figure out how to resolve it and run back to it. And this is fight or flight muscle that's very powerful in us as we deal with conflict. We're going to deal with conflict, and clearly God gives us ways to deal with it.
Yes.
It's quite interesting in Matthew 18 in the book today, as we dig into the text. I just thought it was remarkable that Jesus teaches us how to respond to brothers and has a process for how to do it. And it says, here's one way to do it. You can go to your brother, you can try to reconcile with him.
Yes.
And then if that doesn't work, then we have another step in the process. And then if that doesn't work, we have another step in the process. And if that doesn't work, then we bail on the relationship, is what he's talking about. But what is most interesting is not just the process to me. What's most interesting to me is right there in the very first verses, he says, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. Now that's fascinating, right?
Yes.
So it isn't about, it's about making someone aware of how they hurt us. And it sounds like your wife is probably pretty cunning at making you aware of some things, right?
She's good at that.
Yeah, my wife's good at pointing out my faults too. And I think a lot of wives are really good at pointing out faults. And I'm not saying that to be, to be spiteful. No. I just think it's interesting. we often say this, our wives are good at pointing out our faults, but what it is people outside of us
Yes.
are good at being aware of how we're behaving and pointing it out.
Yes.
And often we are unreceptive to that.
Yes.
Therefore, because we're unreceptive, Jesus says, do it this way first, see if they become receptive. Then do this, then do this, then do this, and hopefully somewhere through that process we become receptive, and that's how we deal with conflict. Conflict is about, well, becoming aware, right? Is making us aware of something. And you started this whole conversation saying it's by becoming aware that we're trying to get our way.
That's right.
All right?
Yeah.
Or we're bumping up against the sovereignty of God.
Yes.
But throughout the process, conflict is also about us pushing through kind of the hard awareness that we may be selfish and that we're hurting other people in the process.
Absolutely.
Right? So when you engage in conflict with people, do you tend to see it negatively or positively?
You know, Vince,
Be completely honest.
Yeah,
now, you know?
yeah. So here's my thing is, I feel like I have some thick skin.
Yeah.
And I'm a guy I'm an external processor. So being an external processor and a verbal man,
Yeah.
I run into conflict on I'll say like a semi-regular basis, not because I'm looking for conflict, but because the way that I'm beginning to understand things, I have to process it verbally.
Yeah.
And I'm a young man, I'm 32.
Yeah.
So I'm still learning how to hold my tongue. Like if I think something's a bad idea, I'll just say, that's a really bad idea. And what I don't do is I'm not accounting for, not every person can engage in an idea detached from themselves.
Right.
So when I say that's a bad idea, what happens is somebody internally takes that and goes, you've just...
They over-personalize it.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I'm learning that, I don't think of conflict as a bad thing because as we've been looking for a potential home to move, which it looks like the Lord has closed the door. Yeah. We're going to stay where we are. But each moment where you receive a no or a critique, hopefully in a loving kind of way, it's one step closer for you becoming the man who God wants you to become.
There you go.
And so for me, what I'm learning, I find it really interesting that the people you're closest to are typically the people who are informing you of your areas where you need to grow.
Yeah. Exactly.
And my wife there's nobody better than her to inform me of, you know, David, you've said this the last 3 weeks. Right.
That's right.
Do you really want to do that?
Yeah. Yeah,
and
then cutting it down to brass tacks. You know, I'll tell you, I am so excited that you presented it that way, and here's why. You said I'm a verbal processor.
Yes.
And of course, I know that you are, and that's what I love about you, is that you'll process things in a verbal way. And because of it, you bump into conflict.
Yes.
And that's good for you to know, to be aware of that about yourself, because we each have ways that we handle things. And it has something to do with our DNA, it has something to do with our gifts and talents, has something to do with the way that we engage in personal or interpersonal conversation. And that's okay. We can have those ways, right? That's okay. But to be aware of how they impact other people is very important. And then on the other side of it, if we can see conflict maybe in the light of how you see it, it's not always bad.
That's right.
It's a way that you're choosing to grow.
That's
right.
right.
So you're using conflict as a way to grow in your relationship with your wife or other people, and that's okay.
Yes.
And it's a way for you to grow personally, and it's a way to push them to growth as well. And so we kind of have to have a dial on that thing, so to speak, right? And kind of understand, when is it right to push in?
That's right.
When is it right to dial it back? Not only for other people, right, as we push into conflict, but for our own self. When do I need to dial it back and receive some feedback? And when do I need to dial it up and push into the conflict? And I think that's exactly what Jesus is teaching us, is there's this whole process to the whole thing. Some of it has to do with us. Some of it has to do with other people. Some of it has to do with how we handle it.
Correct.
The dials we have on it, but we can't avoid it.
No,
right?
we cannot.
We can't avoid this thing. And I got to tell you, as men, I do see sometimes men avoid doing hard things, avoid the conflict. In fact, they'll get so far down a hairball that they just want to run from it completely, and they look at that hairball and they see no possible way for it to untwine.
Yes.
So they run from it, which is exactly what God doesn't want us to do. I have a friend, this is just a quick story, but I have a friend who engaged in some white collar crime.
Yes.
And got a couple of $1 million into this thing, was found out, did prison time, and for the rest of his life, he's going to be paying off the debt he owes to other people, the rest of his life.
That's right.
And he's not joking about it, seriously, for the rest of his life. He's my age, and he keeps sending off every month the bills that he's got to pay to the people that he's hurt and damaged. And actually, to be quite honest with you, he could try to avoid it, he could run from it. But I love that every month he's got to pay that bill.
That's right.
Right?
Yep.
Because that makes him every day a better man.
Wow.
Recompense for sin that he had, consequences with other people. And while we can get off with it with him, right, we can't get off with it with others. And we've got to push into conflict sometimes. So guys, I just want to encourage you today to know that, you know, you need another brother like I need Dave right here. Amen. And we need to be having these conversations, because sometimes I need a Dave in my life to push me to do the hard things that I need to do. And we can't back down from conflict. In fact, I think Jesus says pretty clearly that we can't back down. To back down is to lose. In fact, to lose is to be put out from brotherhood, as Jesus says in Matthew 18. And so I want to encourage you to push into the conflicts of your life, to do it in the right way, at the right time, with the right people, using the right words, but to lean into it in a Christ-like way, a God-honoring way. And guys, get off the bench, get into the game, get your copy of 30 Virtues That Build a Man, find another brother to walk through life with you, and let's build better men, all right? And you're one of them. So I'll see you right back here next time on another episode of Man Talk.